What qualities does someone like myself look for in somebody working in the PR context? It's a really good question because it's quite an unusual mixture of skills. First of all, it's absolutely essential that somebody can write well. Why is that important? Because we're producing content that needs to be shared with journalists. We're also writing to journalists, and so we typically say that people must have A-level English or equivalent, but seriously they have to have a love of the English language, and that's really, really key. Because if you send journalists material that's littered with spelling errors or typing errors, then it's seen as lacking in credibility, and that's not a good reflection on your client. In terms of skills, good organisation is needed because it's about teamwork. You can afford to be completely chaotic and disorganised if you work on your own because you're not actually impacting on other people. But as soon as you're working in a team, you have to be organised. And even if you're not naturally an organised person, you need to be aware that you need to express to other people and you work as a team, so you know what you're doing. And there are some very easy ways of identifying if people are good at organising. What strategies do they adopt, for example, to make sure that they remember dates, events, activities? If somebody doesn't keep lists and relies on it being in their head, then that's often a bit of a red flag. The other thing I would say is very important is a passion for communication. A lot of people think that they're interested in communication, but actually when you push them and you say, well, tell me what media you consume, it's actually very, very narrow. So somebody who wants to make a contribution in PR needs to have a broad interest in the media, everything from radio, TV, online platforms, blogs, newspapers, regional newspapers, magazines, anything that is media output has to be of interest to them. Again, how do you test that? It's a difficult one, but if somebody actually walks past a newspaper stand where there are free newspapers and doesn't bother to pick one up, that's always a bit of a warning sign, because it's our duty as people in the PR business to actually understand the media. And it's not good enough to just say, well, actually I work in a specialised area and I don't need to know, because you have to honour those industries and the journalists who are producing good content. The other thing I'd say is that it's really important that people are resilient. Why? Well, let's just look at it. How do you succeed in PR? You succeed by communicating a client's messages to the external world via media outlets. You have to be able to deal with rejection. You have to deal with people really not wanting to hear from you. You have to deal with having a story that you know is of strong interest, but people might not think it's terribly interesting. So you have to adapt and change tack. You have to put good material out there in the first place. You need to be prepared for the content that you create to be examined, critiqued and improved upon. Because the essence of PR is content, and all content can be improved upon. So what do I mean by that? You can always improve media copy. You can always improve photography. You can always make better videos. What you need to aim for is probably about 95% score. Perfectionism gets in the way of the good. It stops deadlines from being met. But what you need to aim for is the best possible content you can produce at speed. So it means that typically it's an iterative process. The other thing that a lot of people don't realise too is that if you're in the PR business, if you publish something that's incorrect and legally incorrect, you can actually be sued and you can be out of business very quickly, which means that our due diligence is that all of our materials need to be signed off by the client before they're issued. Now, that also means that we have to make sure our standards are really good and our standards are high, because it would be a very sad day if you're to be wiped off the business world planet because you've actually screwed up and written something that's factually incorrect. So you have to be mindful of that. Now, with all of that, you also need to be fairly sensitive to a client's needs and sensitive to colleagues. Now, you could say that's a bit of a contradiction, and I would say again, that is the tough thing about PR. Some of the best people in PR can appear mildly contradictory. So for example, you need to be sensitive to other people's concerns, especially if you're handling PR for somebody's personal brand, if it's in the case of individuals, or if it's their own business, which is akin to looking after their children or even baby. So you have to be sensitive to that, but then you also have to be able to deal with the knocks and slings and arrows that will come your way through having multiple communication with external people. So, what are the rewards? One of the great things about good PR is that you're able to create something from absolutely nothing. For example, it could be an idea or a concept, that you're able to write that as a story and to get it published, sometimes almost word for word for what you've written. Typically the headline will change, but you can actually see the end result in a fantastic way that is really, really superb, because you can see that you've made a difference. And if you're working on good clients who are making the world a better place, that is a fantastic situation. There are very, very few industries where you can create something and create that magic and see the output. So I have to say there are some downsides. What's the downside? Some of the best people in PR and communications have addiction problems. Why? Of course they do, because you're just chasing the next article. You've got that high from seeing your copy, seeing your, one could say it's quite a vain situation, but you're seeing your work published and then you're just looking for the next high. So for all of those of you who talked about ab fab and saying, well, does this represent the PR industry? What really makes me laugh is for any of us working on the coalface at the time that ab fab was actually filmed and at its peak. Of course, the PR industry was actually involved far more outrageous behaviours, far more heavy drinking than was ever shown in ab fab. Having said that, if you want to get into PR because of ab fab, then actually you're slightly missing the point. If you want to work in fashion PR, which that parodied to a strong degree, then it's a really tough industry to get to, and I'm very sorry to say that there are lots of interns who are being offered positions where they're not even being paid for an internship, which is an outrage. If you're looking for a job in PR, do not take any unpaid work. It's actually illegal, but it still goes on. I know because I've recruited people who've been upset to discover this. But all that aside, the PR industry is thriving. If you're open-minded, the subject is as wide as you want it to be. We're really talking about mainstream media, social media. The whole area is always dynamic, it's always changing. There's always something to learn. And the best thing of all about PR is that because you're dealing with the media, which is changing constantly, then you are always learning if you're just keeping up. And you will be learning fantastically well if you're aiming to stay ahead of the game. And that, for me, is the best thing about PR.